we? Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. We are still leaning on that short story thing, and we're going to be doing some dubiously spooky short stories this week. More so, uh, more so a creeping, underlying dread as you consider the concepts that are put in place here rather than, something that goes bump in the night. A little bit more psychological horror than anything this week. Some big names coming up. We've got first up The Water Eater by Wynn Marks. It's an excerpt from 1953 a 1953 issue of Galaxy. Later in the night, we'll have something by Vonnegut that I did initially hesitate about reading, but decided to go for it anyway. There's a couple other short stories in between there too. You may recognize The Doorway. You may recognize Microman. Who knows? I don't know what you recognize. I'm not part of your brain. But I do know that we're going to dive in to The Water Eater here in just a few moments. Oh, there's a new menu on my cell phone. Oh, I can see clips people make now. That's fun. Nobody ever clips me anyway. Anyway, uh, let's. Oh, stretch you. Get our stretches in. Oh, I have a crunch in my shoulder. I can't get out. Come on. Come on out of there. Nope, it's not coming out of there. I think I got it. Just now. Alright, let's dive into The Water Eater by Wynn Marks. Most experiments were dropped because they failed, and some because they worked too well. I just lost a weekend. I ain't too anxious to find it, mind. And instead, I sure wish I had gone fishing with McCarthy and the boys like I'd planned. I drive a beer truck for a living, but here it is, almost noon Monday, haven't turned a wheel. Sure, I get the beer wholesale, and I've been known to take some advantage of my discount, but that's not what happened this weekend. Instead of fishing or bowling or poker or taking the kids down to the amusement park over Saturday and Sunday, I've been losing sleep over an experiment. Down at the Elks Club, the boys say I got a working. The boys say that for a working stiff, I've got a very inquiring mind. I guess that's because they always see me reading popular science, Scientific American, and such, instead of the stack of Esquires that are piled a foot deep in the middle of the big table in the reading room, just like the rest of them do. It was my inquiring mind that lost me my wife, skin of my right hand, a lot of fun, and sleep. Yeah, not a wink of sleep for 2 days now. That's the main reason I'm writing it down now. I read somewhere if you wrote down your troubles, you'd get them out of your system. Thought I had troubles Friday night when I pulled into the driveway and Lottie yelled at me from the porch that the fire's out and it's flooded. Hurry up. Trouble. Yeah, that was just the beginning. But Lottie's as cute as a little extra. Lottie is as cute as a. Dang, I can't. This is written. I am putting on this accent intentionally based on how it's written. Lottie is as cute a little ex-waitress as ever flipped the suds off a glass of beer, but she just ain't mechanically minded. Day Uncle Alphonse died and left us $2,500, and I went out and bought a kitchen and shed full of appliances for her. That was a sad day, all right. She's lived a fearful life ever since, too proud of her dishwasher and automatic this and that to consider selling them, but scared stiff of the noises they make and the vibrations and mysterious dials and lights, etc., etc. You know how it is. So this Friday afternoon, when the oil burner blew out from the high wind, she got terrified, sent the kids over to their grandmother's in a cab, and sat for 2 hours trying to make up her mind whether to call the fire department or a plumber. Meanwhile, the blasted oil stove was overflowing into the fire pot. "Well, turn it off," I yelled. I'll be in right away." And I ducked into the garage and got a big handful of rags and a hunk of string and a short stick. Now this I'd been through before. Went in and kissed her pretty face, and a couple of worry lines disappeared for it. "Give me a pan or something," I said, and started dismantling the front of the heater. These gravity flow oil heaters weren't built to make it easy to drain off the excess oil, mind. There's brass plug at the inlet, but nobody in history's been able to stir one, the oil man told me. I weigh 200 pounds stripped, but all I ever did was ruin a tool trying to. Only way to get out the oil was to open the front, stuff rags down the narrow fire slot, and sop up the stuff and fish out the rags with a string tied round one end of the bundle. Then you wring out the rags with your bare hands into a pan. Hey, Lottie, I yelled. This is your roaster. It'll be hard to clean out that oil smell. But of course, it was too late. I'd squeezed half a pint of oil into it already, so I went on dunking and ringing and thinking how lousy my cigarettes were going to taste all evening, feeling glad I delivered beer instead of oil for a living, at least. I got the stove bailed out and lit with only one serious blast to suit out the light here hole. I dumped the oil out in the alley and set the roaster pan in the sink. Lottie was peeling potatoes for dinner, and she snuggled her yellow curls on my shoulder, kind of apologetically for the mess she'd caused me. Scrubbed the soot and oil off my hands and told her it was all right, only next time, for gosh sakes, turn the stove off at least. Water I was splashing into the roaster, gathered up in little shrinking drops, reminded me of the pig hawks I bought home for Sunday dinner. We're going to rate throwing out unless we got that oil smell out of the pan. Tell you what you do, I said to Lottie. Get me all your cleaning soaps and stuff, and let's see what we got. Sorry, I'm going to drop the accent unless he's talking, because I feel like it's making it difficult to differentiate between when he's talking and when there's just exposition happening. Lottie's always trying out some new handy-dandy little kitchen helper compound, so she hefted up quite an armload. Now, when I was in high school, I really liked chemistry. Charlie boy scientist, my pals used to sneer at me, but I was pretty good at it. I've been reading the science magazines all along, ever since. So I know what detergent's supposed to do, about how all those soaps acts, and stuff that most people take the advertiser's word for. Now, this one's got a lot of caustic in it, see? I told Lottie, holding up a random container. Let me try that again. This one's got a lot of caustic in it, see? I told Lottie. And she nodded and said that's the one that ruined her aluminum coffee pot. She remembered it specially. I poured some very hot tap water into the roaster and shook in the strong soap oil. This is to saponify the oil. What's saponify? Means to make soap. Soap's mainly a mixture of some caustic with a fat or an oil. Makes sudsy soap. But we've got soap. Why don't you just use the soap we got? We went into the business of soap making pretty deep. Meanwhile, I read some more labels, added pinches of this and that detergent, a few squirts of liquid wonder cleaners. Didn't say what was in them. In her crisp Scotch way, Lottie got across to me. She thought I was wasting soap powder and my time and cluttering up the sink while she was busy there, so I wound up with half a cup of doozy soap flakes, filled the pan to the brim, and set the concoction at the back of the drain board to do its business. You better be being good over there, Magnus. When dinner was over, I was in the living room reading the paper when I heard Lottie muttering at the sink. Lottie doesn't usually mumble or mutter, so I went out to see what was wrong. Nice mess, she said, and pointed at the roaster. The stuff had cooled and gelled into a half-solid condition. We had a super-saturated solution. When it cooled off, it coagulated. Lottie scowls. It makes her nervous when I use big words, which I only do when I'm talking about chemistry and the like. Excuse me. Someone is pawing at things that I don't think he's supposed to be. Excuse me, sir. Do you have a permit for those holes you're digging? Sir? Sir, the press has some questions? Oh, you're avoiding the question. Okay. Oh, man. The press questions bit really never gets old. I could keep doing it to the cat forever. I sure think it's funny. So, I don't know what he was digging at, but I moved a bunch of the stuff in hopes that it would stop him. Anyway, where were we? What I'm worried is he smells a mouse, because it's that time of year. Anyway, well, uncoagulate it and dump it out my roaster. My scientific inquiring mind was stirred. as I lifted the pan over to the table under the center light. We had here a gelatin of various cleaners, every one of them claiming to be the best ever. What would this new combination do? I grabbed a pan off the stove that had a mess of scorched carrot leavings on the bottom. Lottie'd been soaking it with about half an inch of water. As I reached for a tablespoon, Lottie objected. Look now, if you're going to start another experiment, dump that mess out first. Let me work on the roaster. I saved about a cupful of the slimy gunk, and she went back to her dishes. Well, you'll be sorry, I said under my breath. This turns out to be the only batch of the finest cleaner in the whole world, and that's only with a cupful. A minute later, I was glad she hadn't heard me. When I dropped a little glob of the stuff into the carrot pan and stirred it around a bit, instead of dissolving and diluting in the extra water, the mixture seemed to stay the same density after swallowing up the water. Give me a pie tin. Lottie sighed, but she got a shallow pan out of the pantry and handed it to me. Then I poured the jelly out of the carrot pan and made my first important discovery. The stuff was not good for cleaning out scorched carrots. The pot was bone dry, so were the carrots. They had a desiccated look and were stuck worse than ever to the bottom. I brushed them with my finger, and the top layers powdered to dust. Then I noticed that not a droplet or smidgen of the jelly remained in the pot. When I poured it out, it had gone out all at the same time, as if it was trying to hang together. The carbonized carrots at the very bottom were hard and dry, too. It was a scrape job if I ever saw one. The pie tin was now almost full to the rim. The globby stuff sort of rolled around, trying to find a flat condition, which it finally did. The motion was not as startling as the sudden quiet that settled over the surface after a last ripple. Stuff looked like it was waiting. The temptation was worse than a park bench labeled wet paint, so I stuck my finger in it, right in the middle of it. Oh no. A ripple flashed out from the center like when you drop a pebble in a pool, and the ripple hit the brim and converged back to my finger. When it hit, the surface climbed up my finger about 1/8 of an inch. Another ripple, another 1/8 of an inch, and now I felt something like a gentle sucking sensation. Also another feeling I can only tell you was unclammy. I jerked away fast and shook my finger hard over the pan, but it wasn't necessary. None of the stuff had stayed with me. In fact, my finger was dry, powdery dry. Then I got the feeling that someone was staring over my shoulder, and there was. It was Lottie, and she had a look of horror on her face that didn't help my nerves a bit. Get rid of it, Charlie. Get rid of it, please. Throw it out. Now, honey, it ain't alive. It is. Lottie chatters quite a bit and pretty well speaks her mind, but she doesn't go around making assertions. When she does come out flat-footed with a serious statement, it's always from the bottom of her 22-carat womanly intuition, and she's practically always right. How could it be alive? I argued. I often argue when I know I'm wrong. This time I argued because I wanted to wipe the awful look off my wife's face. Now come on in the living room and relax. And then that sweet-natured, honey-haired little Lottie did a violent thing. Still staring over my shoulder at the pie tin, she screamed wide open and ran out of the house. A second later, I heard her start the car out the driveway at 30 miles an hour in reverse. She burned rubber out in front and was gone. I hadn't moved an inch. When she screamed, I looked back at the jelly to see why, and that stuff had oozed over the edge. It was flowing slowly toward me. I know a little about Korbisky and how he wanted everybody to make what he called a corticothalamic pause whenever they get scared as hell. So I was making this corticothalamic pause, which is really counting 10 before you do anything, while Lottie was leaving the house. When I got through with my pause, I jumped backward over my kitchen chair so hard I must have knocked my head on the tile sink board. When I came to, it was after midnight. The kitchen light was still on. Lottie was still gone. I knew it. If she was here, she'd have had me in bed. No matter how much of my employer's product I sampled, never has Lottie let me sleep it off on the kitchen floor. Her 110 pounds is a match for my 200 in more ways than one. She takes good care of her man. Then I realized this wasn't a stag beer bust. There was something about a pot of soap jelly. It was still there.
A long slug of the half-transparent stuff had strung down off the edge of the table and still hung there like a nasty-looking icicle. The knob on the back of my head throbbed so much at first I couldn't figure what was wrong with the air. Then my aching, dry throat told me what the matter was. The air was dry like the summer we spent at a dude ranch in Arizona. It made my nostrils crimp and my tongue felt like a mouthful of wrinkled pepperoni. When I got to my feet and looked at the top of the kitchen table, I almost panicked again. But this time the pause worked and I got better results. Alive or dead, the gunk was the most powerful desiccant I'd ever heard of. It drunk up the water in the carrot pot, sucked the surface moisture from my finger, then spent the last few hours feeding on the humidity in the air. It was thirsty. Like alcohol has affinity for water, this stuff was the same way, only even more so. In fact, it even reached out toward anything that had water in it, like me. That's why it had oozed over the pan the way it did. What's so frightening about that? I asked myself. Plants grow toward water. Yeah, but plants are alive. That's what Lottie had said before she screamed. Oh, so you're thirsty? Okay, I'll give you a real drink. I got a bucket from the service porch and took the pancake turner to scrape the gooey nightmare into it. I even caught the drip off the edge, and it seemed quietly grateful to sink back to the parent glob in the pail, which by now amounted to about a quart. I set the pail in the laundry tray and turned on the faucet hard. In about a second and a half, I almost sprained my wrist turning it off. Not only did the jelly drink up the water without dissolving, but it started creeping up the stream in a column about 3 inches in diameter, with the water pouring down its middle. When I got the water shut off, the unholy jelly spout slopped back disappointedly. And now the bucket was over half full of the stuff. I dropped in an ice cube as an experiment. Didn't even splash. The surface pulled away, letting the cube make a pretty good dent in it, but then only gradually did the displaced goo creep back around it as if to sample it cautiously. I couldn't stand the dry air anymore, so I threw open the doors and windows and let the cool, damp night air come in. The ice cube had disappeared without even a surface puddle. Now, as the humidity came back, I thought I noticed a restless shimmering in the jelly. The phone rang. It was Lottie's mother, wanting to know why Lottie had come over there in hysterics and where I had been since 7 o'clock. I don't remember what I had answered, but it served the purpose. Lottie hasn't returned, and they haven't called up any more. When I returned to the bucket, it seemed that the stuff was deeper yet, but I couldn't tell because I hadn't marked the level. I got Lottie's fever thermometer out of the medicine chest and took the jelly's temperature. Read 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Wall thermometer read 58 degrees too. Room temperature, with the windows open. What kind of life could this be that had no temperature of its own? But then what kind of a fancy pants metabolism could you expect out of an organism that fed on nothing but Lake Michigan water straight out of the reservoir? I got a pencil and notebook out of Lottie's neat little desk and started making notes. I wondered about the density of the stuff. Ice floated in it, and the bucket seemed heavy. So I broke the thermometer and tapped a drop of mercury onto the restless surface. The droplet sank slowly to the bottom with no apparent effect either way. Heavier than water, lighter than mercury. Took a beer out of the refrigerator and swallowed it. The last drops I sprinkled into the pail. The drippings sizzled across the surface until only a fine dust was left. A tiny ripple flipped this dust over to the edge of the pail, as if clearing the thirsty decks for action. But this drew my eyes to the rim of the liquid. There was no meniscus, either up nor down. Remembering back, I figured this meant there was no surface tension, which reminded me that part of this mixture was made of detergent. But had I created a new form of life? Like Lottie said, was it really alive? Well, certainly it could reproduce itself, had brains enough to know the direction of more water, like when it took off after me on the table. Not long ago, there was this important physicist who wrote about how life probably got started all the way back when the Earth was just forming. He argued that the special creation was more or less a lot of hogwash. What actually took place was that as the Earth cooled, all the hot chemicals mixing around sort of stumbled onto a combination or two that took on the first characteristics of life. In other words, this guy left off where Mr. Darwin began his theory of evolution. Now, me, I don't know. Lottie makes me go to church with the kids every Sunday. I like it. This chemical theory about life getting started is right. Well, And a lot of people got the wrong idea about things, I always figured. But how would I or a physicist explain this quivering mass of protoplasm I got on my hands by accident this particular Friday night? I experimented some more, got out the kids' junior encyclopedia, looked up some things I'd forgot, and some I'd never learned in the first place. So it got to be Saturday morning. Fred and Claude phoned about the fishing trip, and I made an excuse. No one else bothered me. All day Saturday I studied, and all Saturday night and Sunday too, for that matter. But I couldn't figure out any sensible answers that would make peace with my minister. It looked like I had either created some form of life, or some life form in the stove oil that had been asleep for a billion years and suddenly found a condition to its liking and decided to give up hibernating in favor of reproduction. What drove me on was the thought that I must have something here. It was commercially important, a new culture of something that would revolutionize some industry, some branch of chemistry or biology. Couldn't even stop to fry an egg. I chewed up some crackers, drank a few more bottles of beer when my stomach got too noisy. I wasn't sleepy, although my eyes felt like they'd pushed 4 inches into my skull. Junior's little chemistry set didn't tell me very much when I made the few tests I knew how. The litmus paper I remained either red or blue when stuck into the jelly. This surprised me a little. The whole mass of desudsed washing compound mixture had started out with a pretty good shot of lye in it. So my notes grew, but my useful information didn't. By midnight Sunday, it felt like, or it let's try that again. By midnight Sunday, it appeared that my jelly invention had only one important talent: the ability to drink endlessly anything containing water. And only the water was used, it seemed. Dissolved solid were cast aside in the form of variously colored dusts. By now, the goo had outgrown the pail and was 2/3 up in the laundry tub. A slow drip from the faucet kept the surface of my monster in a constant state of frenzy, like feeding a rum pot beer by the thimbleful. It was fascinating to watch the little curlicues of jelly flip up after each drop, reaching for more, then falling back with a cranky little lash. At 2 o'clock this morning, I began to get a little sense in me, or maybe it was just the fear finally catching up again. There was danger here. I was too fuzzy to know exactly what the danger was, but I began to develop a husky hate for the whole project. Kill it, came into my mind. Get rid of it, Charlie. Lottie's scream shrilled back into my ears. This command became very important to me. I became angry. You want a drink, do you? I shouted out loud. Put on the tea kettle, and when it was to full steam, I took it back to the tub. I'll give you a drink with kick in it. What happened, I'd like to forget. 10 times as fast as it had climbed up the cold water spout, it ran up the boiling water stream into the tea kettle, blew off the lid, and swarmed over my hand with a scalding, dry slither, made me drop the kettle into the tub and scream with pain. The jelly steamed and stuck to my flesh long enough to sear it half to the bone. Then it slopped back with the rest and left me grabbing my wrist and tearing at the flesh with my fingernails to stop the pain. Then I got insane. I got insane mad. Got my big blowtorch I used for peeling paint, and I lit it, pumped it up as high as it would go, and aimed it down into that tub. Not too much happened. The jelly shrank from the roaring blast, but it didn't climb over the edge. It shrank some more, and I poured the flame on. It didn't burn. It just got to be less and less, and what was left began to get cloudy. When I hit the bottom of the tub, the last glob moved around pretty actively, trying to escape the heat, but I got it. Every damn last shred of it. And I was laughing and crying when I dropped the torch into the tub. I'd been holding it with my scalded hand, and I guess I fainted. I wasn't out long. Got up and dressed my hand with lard, and it felt pretty good. Took a couple of aspirins and sat down at Lottie's typewriter. I know I won't sleep until I get this off my mind and about the way it happened. I probably won't believe all of it myself when I get back to normal. Just now went out and fished the blowtorch out of the laundry tub. All that was left in the bottom of the tub was maybe half a pound of singed-looking soap flakes. There, I finished writing it all down, but still not sleepy. Not worried about patching things up with Lottie. She's the most wonderful, understanding wife a guy ever had. My hand Feels real good now. I got it wrapped up in lard and gauze. I could drive the truck if I wanted to. Not afraid of getting fired or bawled out for not coming to work on time this morning. No, the reason I haven't turned the wheel on my beer truck today is something else. Friday night, when Lottie wanted to wash the roaster, I saved only a cup of jelly for my experiments. The rest she washed down the drain, and the sewer empties into Lake Michigan. Brewery where I load up's right on the shore of Lake Michigan. I'm afraid to drive down there and look. That's a good one. That was really good. So that was the Water Eater. It was from an old June issue of Galaxy magazine in the 50s. Very fun. Great, very tense ending there. Definitely something you could steal for like a Monster of the Week campaign. You could even do something like that for like you could drop that into like a D&D game. Honestly, like some kind of alchemist accidentally invents like a anti-water elemental or something. You could put that in a lot of settings and tell a great story with it. All right, let's dive into the next one, which I believe next is. Oh, where is it? The doorway is next. If it'll open. Come on, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. Open the book for me. You opened earlier. There we go. Probably it's gonna open like 4 or 5 copies of this thing now because I clicked it too many times. Oh, okay, just the one. Nice. Let's keep going, shall we? The Doorway by Evelyn E. Smith. A man may wish he'd married his first love and not really mean it, but an insincere wish may turn ugly in dimensions unknown. It is my theory, Professor Falabella said, helping himself to a cookie, that no one ever really makes a decision. What really happens is that whatever alternative courses of action are called for, the individuality splits up and continues on in 2 or more divergent planes, very much like the parthenogenesis of a unicellular animal. Delicious cookies, these, Miss Hughes. Oh, thank you, Professor. I made them myself, Gloria simpered. You must give us one of the recipe. You must give us the recipe," said one of the ladies, and the others murmured their agreement, glad to get their individualities on a plane they could understand. Since most decisions are hardly as momentous as the individual imagines, since the imagination of the average individual is very limited, many of these different planes, or as they're colloquially known, space-time continuums, may exist in close, even tangential relationship. Hang on, where's this from? When was this published? Does this say when it was published? It doesn't. There's no like, oh, this is from that. Usually these short stories kind of have that kind of, oh yeah, it's this provenance. This is interesting. Anyway, tangential relationships where we were. Gloria rose unobtrusively and took the teapot to the kitchen for a refill. Her husband stood by the sink, moodily drinking whiskey out of the bottle, so as to avoid having to wash a glass afterward. Bill, you're not being polite to our guests. Why don't you go out and listen to Professor Falabella? I can hear him perfectly well from here, Bill muttered, and indeed, the professor's mellifluous tones pervaded every nook and cranny of the thin-walled house. Oh, long-winded cultist, what's the professor of, I'd like to know? Professor Falabella is not a cultist. He's a great philosopher. Bill Hughes said something unprintable. If I'd married Lucy Allison, she'd never have filled the house with long-haired cultists on my so-called day of rest. Gloria's soft chin trembled, and her blue eyes filled with tears. She was beginning to put on weight, he noticed. I've been hearing nothing but Lucy Allison, Lucy Allison, Lucy Allison for the past year. You said yourself she looked like a horse. Well, horses have sense. He was being brutal, but he couldn't help it, and he didn't want to. Professor Falabella was only the most long-winded of a long series of mystics that Gloria was forever dragging into the house. The trouble with the half-educated, he thought bitterly, is that they seek culture in the most peculiar places. I bet she would have let me had peace on Sunday. Just goes to show what happens when you marry a woman solely for her looks. He drained the bottle, then hurled it into the garbage pail with a resounding crash. Gloria's shoulders shook as she lifted the kettle. I wish I'd decided to be an old maid. That's a very unlikely possibility, he thought. Even now, shop-worn as she was, Gloria could have a fairly wide range of suitors should something happen to him. She looked fantastic, but how deceiving appearances could be. Professor Falabella was still talking as Bill and Gloria emerged from the kitchen. I believe that it is possible for an individual who exists on a limited plane of imagination to transpose from one plane to an adjacent one without difficulty. Great heavens, what was that? Something had whisked past the archway leading into the foyer. Oh, don't pay any attention. The house is haunted. My dear, I know the most marvelous exterminator, another lady offered. The house, Gloria assured her coldly, really is haunted. We've been seeing things ever since we moved in. And she really believed it, Bill thought. Believed the house was haunted, that is. Of course, he'd seen things too, but he was enlightened enough to know that ghosts don't exist, even if you do see them. Professor Falabella cleared his throat. As I was saying, it is possible to send the individual through another, well, dimension, as some popular writers would have it, to one of his other spatial existences on the same temporal plane. It's merely necessary for him to find the door. Nonsense. Wholly unmitigated nonsense. Every head swiveled to look at Bill. Gloria restrained tears with an effort. Brute, someone muttered. But ridicule apparently only stimulated the professor, and he beamed. You don't believe me. Your imagination cannot extend to the comprehension of the multifariousness of space. Nonsense, said Bill again, but less confidently. I believe that I have discovered the doorway, and the way is open. However, most people fear to penetrate the unknown, even though it is to enter another phase of their own existence. I do admit the shock of spatial transference, no matter how slight, combined with a concrete awareness of a previous spatial relationship, would be perhaps too much for the keenly sensitive individualism. Bill opened his mouth. I know what you're about to say, young man. You don't have to be a mind reader to know that. His consonants were already a little slurred, and he knew Gloria was ashamed of him. Served her right. He'd been ashamed of her for years. Professor Falabella smiled. His teeth were very sharp and white. Very well, Mr. Hughes, since you're a skeptic, perhaps you will not object to being the subject of our experiment yourself. What kind of experiment? Merely to go through the door. Any door can become the doorway if it's transposed into the proper spatial dimension. That door, for instance. Professor Falabella waved his hand toward the doorway of what Gloria liked to call Bill's study. You want me to open the door and go into that room? That's all? That's all. Of course, you go with the awareness that it's the threshold of another plane. You step voluntarily from this existence to an adjacent one. Oh, sure. He had just remembered, Bill had just remembered that there was a nearly full bottle of Calvaire in the bottom drawer of the desk. Oh, sure, anything to oblige. Very well. Go to the door. Keep remembering that of your own free will you're passing from this plane to the next. Look out, everybody, Bill called raucously as he opened the door. I'm coming on to the next plane. No one laughed. He stepped over the threshold, shutting the door firmly behind him. Wonderful excuse to get away from those blasted women. He'd climb out the window as soon as he'd collected the whiskey and give them a nervous moment, thinking he'd really passed into another existence. Served Gloria right. For a moment as he crossed, he had a strange sensation. Maybe there was something in what Professor Falabella said, but no, there he was in the study. All that mumbo jumbo was getting him down, that's all. He was a nervous man, only nobody appreciated the fact. Taking a cigarette out of the pack in his pocket, he reached for the lighter on his desk, and it wasn't there. Time and time again he'd told Gloria not to touch his things, and always she disobeyed him. Company was coming, she must tidy up. Cooking and cleaning, that was all she was good for. But this was carrying tidiness too far. She'd even removed the ashtrays. Where did that glass block paperweight come from? He'd had a penguin in a snowstorm, he'd been happy with it. This was too much, he'd tell Gloria off, stealing a man's penguin. He opened the door into the living room and bumped into Lucy Allison. "Don't you think you've been in there long enough, Bill?" she asked acridly. "I'm sure your guests would appreciate a I'm sure your guests would appreciate catching a glimpse of you." "Well, hello, Lucy. I didn't know Gloria had invited you." "Gloria, Gloria, Gloria!" Lucy cut across his sentence. "You've been talking about nothing but that dumb little blonde for months." Because of the people in the room beyond, her voice was pitched low, but her pale eyes glittered unpleasantly behind her spectacles. "I wish you'd married her. You'd made a fine pair." Gently, caressingly, the short hairs on the back of Bill's neck rose. "Come back in here," Lucy said, hauling him back into the living room, where a number of people who had been enjoying the domestic fracas suddenly broke into loud and animated chatter. Uh, Dr. Hildebrand was telling us all about nuclear fission." "Can't find an ashtray," Bill said, seizing on something tangible. "Can't find an ashtray on the whole darn place." "We've been over this millions of times, Bill. You know." She smiled at the guest, a smile that carefully excluded Bill. "I'm allergic to smoke, but I can never get my husband to remember he isn't to smoke inside the house." "Now take the neutron, for example," Dr. Hildebrand said through a mouthful of pate. "What is the neutron? It is only... What was that?" The wraith of Gloria crossed the foyer and disappeared. Bill took a step forward and then stood still. Lucy smiled, self-consciously. "That's nothing at all. The house is merely haunted." Everyone laughed. "I forgot something," Bill muttered, and dashed back to the study. He yanked open the bottom drawer of the desk, and sure enough, there was a bottle of Shenley, nearly a third full. "There are some advantages," he thought as he tilted it to his lips, "in having a limited imagination." Oh, okay. The provenance on this one was at the end. This was produced from Fantastic Universe, 1955, the September issue. That's fun. That's a fun little concept. That's definitely a science fiction concept that's come back into vogue in a major way. As of late, that's a very that has to be a very early multiverse story. Kind of playing with the fact of, oh yeah, there are multiple parallel space times, and they all extend from the decisions you make, even though really what they're extending from are subatomic interactions. But some atomic interactions propagate upward to look like larger decisions to a thinking person. Anyway, I digress. It's a fun concept to play with. Can you tell I've written no shortage of fiction on the matter myself? That was a good one. Really, it just kind of picked up the concept and was like, haha, this guy got dunked on by it and he got what he wanted, but not really. Kind of a fun, almost little like Hays Codian thumbing of the nose at, oh, this guy is bad, so he doesn't get what he wants. Fun. Fun little thing. That one was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. So we've done the doorway and the water eater. That brings up the Vonnegut tale, in particular, to be or not to be. And that's that. The title is written in single letters, so not is a 0. For those of you who can't see the screen, it's literally 2 as in the number, the letter B, the letter R, a 0 as in a not, and then 2 and then B. This is one of the few Vonnegut tales that I've found actually lies in the public domain. I've been poking around, and they're all kind of hovering in that age of time where they're still old, but they're not old enough to be public domain. But I've been trying to sprinkle in. I've been considering sprinkling in the ones that can make it onto the show in, and I thought this one was a pretty unsettling little tale for our Halloween journey here. Anyway, To Be or Not to Be by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Everything was perfectly swell. There were no prisons, no slums, no insane asylums, no cripples, no poverty, no wars. All diseases were conquered, and so was old age. Death, barring accidents, was an adventure for volunteers. The population of the United States was stabilized at 40 million souls. Funny to think about now that we're well over 300 million for the population of the States. Anyway, one bright morning in the Chicago lying-in hospital, a man named Edward K. Whaling, Jr. Waited for his wife to give birth. He was the only man waiting. Not many people were born a day anymore. Whaling was 56, a mere stripling in a population whose average age was 129. X-rays had revealed that his wife was going to have triplets. The children would be his first. Young Whaling was hunched in his chair, his head in his hands. He was so rumpled, still, and colorless as to be virtually invisible. His camouflage was perfect, since the waiting room had a disorderly and demoralized air, too. Chairs and ashtrays had been moved away from the walls. The floor was paved with spattered drop cloths. The room was being redecorated. It was being redecorated as a memorial to a man who had volunteered to die. A sardonic old man, about 200 years old, sat on a stepladder painting a mural he didn't like. Back in the days when people aged visibly, his age would have been guessed at 35 or so. Aging had touched him that much before the cure for aging was found. The mural he was working on depicted a very neat garden. Men and women in white, doctors and nurses. They turned the soil, planted seedlings, sprayed bugs, and spread fertilizer. Men and women in purple uniforms pulled up weeds, cut down plants that were old and sickly. They raked the leaves, carried refuse to trash burners. Never, 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 not even in a medieval Holland or old Japan, had a garden been more formal, had been better tended. Every plant had all the loam, light, water, air, and nourishment it could use. A hospital orderly came down the corridor, singing under his breath a popular song. If you don't like my kisses, honey, here's what I'll do. I'll go see a girl in purple and kiss this sad world, toodaloo. If you don't want my lovin', why should I take up all this space? I'll get off this old planet and let my sweet baby have my place. The orderly looked in at the mural and the muralist. Looks so real. I can practically imagine I'm standing in the middle of it. What makes you think you're not in it? Said the painter. He gave a satiric smile. It's called a happy garden of life, you know. That's good of Dr. Hitz, said the orderly. He was referring to one of the male figures in white, whose head was a portrait of Dr. Benjamin Hitz, the hospital's chief obstetrician. Hitz was a blindingly handsome man. Lots of faces to still fill in, said the orderly, and he meant the faces of many of the figures in the mural were still blank. All the blanks were to be filled with portraits of important people on either the hospital staff or from the Chicago office of the Federal Bureau of Termination. Must be nice to be able to make pictures that look like something. The painter's face curdled with scorn. I'm proud of this daub. Do you think this is what my idea of what life really looks like? Well, what's your idea of what life looks like? The painter gestured at a foul drop cloth. There's a good picture of it. Frame that and you'll have a picture a damn sight more honest than this one. You're gloomy, old duck, aren't you? Is that a crime? The orderly shrugged. If you don't like it here, Grandpa, he said, and he finished the thought with a trick telephone number that people who didn't want to live anymore were supposed to call. The zero in the telephone number he pronounced not. The number was 2B, or not 2B. was the telephone number of an institution whose fanciful sobriquets included Automat, Birdland, Cannery, Catbox, Delouser, Easy Go, Goodbye Mother, Happy Hooligan, Kiss Me Quick, Lucky Pierre, Sheep Dip, Wearing Blender, Weep No More, and Why Worry? To be or not to be was the telephone number of the municipal gas chambers of the Federal Bureau of Termination. The painter thumbed his nose at the orderly. When I decide it's time to go, I won't be at a sheep dip. Oh, do-it-yourselfer, huh? Messy business, Grandpa. Why don't you have a little consideration for the people who have to clean up after you? The painter expressed with an obscenity his lack of concern for the tribulations of his survivors. The world could do with a good deal more mess, if you ask me. The orderly laughed and moved on. Wailing, the waiting father, mumbled something without raising his head, then he fell silent again. A coarse, formidable woman strode into the waiting room on spike heels. Her shoes, stockings, trench coat, bag, and oversea cap were all purple, the purple the painter called the color of grapes on Judgment Day. The medallion on her purple musette bag was the seal of the Service Division of the Federal Bureau of Termination, an eagle perched on a turnstile. The woman had a lot of facial hair, an unmistakable mustache, in fact. Curious thing about gas chamber hostesses was that no matter how lovely or feminine they were when they recruited, they all sprouted mustaches within 5 years or so. Is this where I'm supposed to come? She said to the painter. A lot would depend on what your business was. You aren't about to have a baby, would you? They told me I was supposed to pose for some picture. My name's Leora Duncan. Yeah, and you dunk people. What? Skip it. That sure is a beautiful picture. It looks just like heaven or something. Or something, said the painter. He took a list of names from his smock pocket. Duncan. Yeah, here you are. You're entitled to be immortalized. See any faceless body you'd like me to stick your head on? We got a few more choice ones left. She studied the mural bleakly. Oh, gee, they're all the same to me. I don't know anything about art. Body's a body, eh? Alrighty. As a master of fine art, I recommend this body here. He indicated a faceless figure of a woman who was carrying dried stalks to a trash burner. Oh, that's more the disposal people, isn't it? I'm in service. I don't do any disposing. The painter clapped his hands in mock delight. Now you say you don't know anything about art, then you prove in the next breath you know more about it than I do. Of course, the sheave carrier's wrong for a hostess. The snipper, pruner, that's more your line. He pointed to a figure in purple who was sawing a dead branch from an apple tree. How about her? You like her at all? Gosh, she said, and blushed and became humble. That puts me right next to Dr. Hitz. That upset you? Good gravy, no, it's just such an honor. You admire him, huh? Who doesn't admire him? She said, worshipping the portrait of Hitz. It was the portrait of a tanned, white-haired, omnipotent Zeus, 240 years old. Who doesn't admire him? He was responsible for setting up the very first gas chamber in Chicago. Nothing would please me more than to put you next to him for all time. Sawing off a limb, that strikes you as appropriate? That is kind of like what I do. She was more demure about what she did. What she did was make people comfortable while she killed them. And while Lenora Duncan was posing for her portrait, into the waiting room bounded Dr. Hitz himself. He was 7 feet tall, and he boomed with importance, accomplishments, and the joy of living. Well, Miss Duncan, he said, and made a joke. What are you doing here? This isn't where the people leave, this is where they come in. Oh, we're going to be in the same picture together. Good! And say, isn't that some picture? I'm sure honored to be in it with you. Let me tell you, I'm honored to be in it with you. Without women like you, this wonderful world we've got wouldn't be possible. He saluted her and moved toward the door that led to the delivery rooms. Guess what was just born? I can't. Triplets! Triplets? She was exclaiming over the legal implication of triplets. The law said that no newborn child could survive unless the parents of the child could find someone who would volunteer to die. Triplets, if they were all to live, called for 3 volunteers. Do the parents have 3 volunteers? Last I heard, they had one. They were trying to scrape another 2 up. I don't think they made it. Nobody made 3 appointments with us. Nobody but singles going in today, unless somebody called in after I left. What's the name? Whaling, said the waiting father, sitting up, red-eyed and frowsy. Edward K. Whaling, Jr. is the name of the happy father-to-be. He raised his right hand, looked at a spot on the wall, and gave a hoarsely wretched chuckle. Present. Oh, Mr. Whaling, I didn't see you. Invisible man. They just phoned me that your triplets have been born. They're all fine. So's the mother. I'm on my way in to see them now. Hooray. You don't sound very happy. What man in my shoes wouldn't be happy? He gestured with his hands to symbolize carefree simplicity. All I have to do is pick out which one of the triplets is going to live, then deliver my maternal grandfather to the happy hooligan and come back here with a receipt. At this, Dr. Hitz became rather severe with Whaling towering over him. You don't believe in population control, Mr. Whaling? I think it's perfectly keen. Would you like to go back to the good old days when the population of Earth was 20 billion, about to become 40 billion, then 80 billion, and 160 billion? You know what a druplet is, Mr. Whaling? Nope. A druplet, Mr. Whaling, is one of the little knobs, one of the little pulpy grains of a blackberry. Without population control, human beings would be packed on the surface of this old planet like drupelets on a blackberry. Think of it. Whaling continued to stare at the same spot on the wall. The year 2000, before scientists stepped in and laid down the law, wasn't even enough drinking water to go around, nothing to eat but seaweed. People still insisted on their right to reproduce like jackrabbits, and their right, if possible, to live forever. I want those kids. I want all 3 of them. Of course you do. That's only human. I don't want my grandfather to die either. Well, nobody's really happy about taking a close relative to the cat box. I wish people wouldn't call it. I wish people wouldn't call it that," said Lenora. The what? I wish people wouldn't call it the cat box and things like that. Gives people the wrong impression. You're absolutely right. Forgive me. He corrected himself, gave the municipal gas chambers their official title, a title no one ever used in conversation. I should have said Ethical Suicide Studios. I'll take VODs that aren't getting monetized for 500, everybody. I've been trying to avoid it, reading this whole thing, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know. This isn't gonna go well. Good thing I can't make money off YouTube right now. Anyway. Everybody rate the podcast 5 stars, please. So I don't get dunked on by every algorithm known to man. Anyway. That sounds so much better. This child of yours, whichever one you decide to keep, Mr. Whaling, they're going to live on a happy, roomy, rich, clean planet, thanks to population control, and a garden like that mural there. He shook his head. 2 centuries ago, when I was a young man, it was a hell that nobody thought could last another 20 years. Now centuries of peace and plenty stretch before us as far as the imagination cares to travel. And he smiled luminously. The smile faded as soon as he saw that Whaling had drawn a revolver. Whaling shot Dr. Hitz dead. There's room for one. Great big one. Then he shot Lenora Duncan. It's only death, he said to her as she fell. There, room for 2. Then he shot himself, making room for all 3 of his children. Nobody came running. Nobody seemingly heard the shots. The painter sat on top of his stepladder, looking down reflectively on the sorry scene. The painter pondered the mournful puzzle of life, demanding to be born, and once born, demanding to be fruitful, to multiply and live as long as possible, to do all that on a very small planet that would have to last forever. All the answers the painter could think of were grim, even grimmer surely than a cat box, a happy hooligan, an easy go. He thought of war, he thought of plague, he thought of starvation. He knew that he'd never paint again, not after this. He let his paintbrush fall to the drop cloths below, then he decided he'd had about enough of life in the happy garden, and he came down from the ladder himself. He took Whaling's pistol, really intending to shoot himself, but he didn't have the nerve. Then he saw the telephone booth in the corner of the room. He went to it and dialed the well-remembered number. To be or not to be. The Federal Bureau of Termination. How soon could I get an appointment? We could probably fit you in late this afternoon, sir. Might even be earlier if we get a cancellation. All right, fit me in if you please. And he gave her his name, spelling it out. Thank you, sir. Your city thanks you, your country thanks you, your planet thanks you, but the deepest thanks of all is from future generations. That's the end of that one. I was like, I don't know, maybe I can read this one. And I'm like, I read like the first half of it just to check. You know, I'm like, oh, maybe it doesn't go as explicit as I thought. In the first half of it, they're dancing around and they're dancing around. I'm like, oh yeah, I can get away with this. No, I can't. Uh, Everyone, please rate this episode highly if you liked it, because I know it's gonna get shot in the foot for that short story and what it discussed. Whether you agree with it or not, that's just how it goes. While I'm talking shop, and I have the curtain raised above my head here, let's talk about the Codex. That little bug above my head. It is a group of reading streamers, much like myself, who all read varying books. Some of us stick to the public domain like I do. Some of us get author permission for more recent books. Someone was doing Atkinson, I believe, was doing some author permission books. Jubilee OB does author permission books, depending on what you can get. There's a couple people who do like they're recording the audiobook recording live, and they cut it down into a good and proper audiobook. I was trying to talk people into that myself, and it didn't work out. But yeah, long story short, Codex is a group of read streamers. We have a book club at the end of every month. I don't think we've picked a book for this month, which is probably for the best because I know I would not have been able to make this month's book club anyway. I'd have been out of town. That's the trouble, is I'm usually very busy near the end of the month, and so I don't get to join in on these book clubs very often because I'm normally moving around. Uh, November, December, I can probably make them though. Let's hope we pick books for November and December. Anyway, that's Codex in a nutshell. I think we've got. Oh, we've only got one more left. How long have we been recording? Only an hour. It's probably for the best for this one to be a little shorter. Um, we haven't been going long enough to make a. We haven't been going long enough to make a an intermission worth it. I don't think. Some of these have been a little shorter than I thought they were gonna be. I forgot about the big blob of Gutenberg text at the end. Let's just dive right into the last one for the night. Micro Man, if I can find it. Micro Man by Forrest J. Ackerman. Come on, open the book, please. Yeah, let's just get a little sippy of water here, and we'll dive right into the last short story for the night. Mm-hmm. Actually, while I'm talking business, let's see. There will be a stream Monday. I'll probably be playing more one shot if you want to drop by for that. I know I'm looking forward to it. I might do it a little earlier in the day, just so more people have a chance to show up. I know my 8 p.m. Central kind of really runs late for a lot of people, and I've been thinking about edging the time earlier, just so we're not all up so late. I might actually move it to Tuesday. I've been thinking about moving it to Tuesday anyway. We will be Monday this time, but maybe after the break, because there will be a break. I'll be out of town for next Friday, so no paper cuts then, which I heartily suggest you go back and listen to some other episodes if you're feeling like you need some more paper cuts in your life. And then I am unlikely to have the the next week's game stream, But I should be back in town in time for paper cuts week after next. So just keep one eye on things. You know, I yell about it in Discord. I post about it on Twitter. You should get a Twitch notification if you hit follow. I don't know if it's any better about things like that than YouTube, but who knows? Um, what else? What else? Yeah, after being out of town, I might change my schedule up a little bit. I am slowly working on having more VODs up and available. I finally have recognized that yes, I take long enough to get around to putting out my VODs that it would probably behoove me to take use of the 14 days that Twitch gives me so people can catch up more immediately. You know, originally I didn't have my VODs on at all just for the sheer factor of, oh, they're over on YouTube and I post them pretty immediately. Well, not quite so much anymore. I've been putting a lot more work into the VODs. There's some stuff spinning behind the scenes that will eventually get launched coming out of those VODs. So, you know, it's taking me more time to work on them. Uh, so I've turned on Twitch VODs so people can catch up more immediately. I think with that in mind, next time we're back on paper cuts, I'm probably going to be diving into longer books again. I don't want to burn through all these short stories too quickly because they're great for when I have a little time left after finishing a book. So we'll be diving into a longer book, and I'm going to keep that a little closer to my chest. I will announce it close. It's one that I've discussed wanting to read several times, and I think it's been long enough that we can finally get around to it. So long as no one steps on my toes. At Codex, please, everyone, extend just just the one time, please. I don't ask you to do this all the time, but just the one time. I'm gonna post in the Discord about it. Please, nobody start this book. I want to do this book, and I saw someone else do it as I was planning to do it, and I'm like, please, don't do it again. But we'll see. Anyway, I've talked enough. Let's get into our last story here. Micro Math by Weaver Wright is the pen name we have, but it's listed as Forrest J. Ackerman in my little list here. So this was reproduced from Fantasy Book Volume Number 1 from 1947. Neat. The early morning streetcar, swaying and rattling along its tracks, did as much to divert my attention from the book I was reading as the contents of the book itself. I did not like Plato. Comfortable though the seat was, I was as uncomfortable as any collegiate could be whose mind would rather dwell upon tomorrow's football game than the immediate task in hand, the morning session with Professor Russell and the book on my lap. My gaze wandered from the book and drifted out the distorted window, then fell to the car sill as I thought over Plato's conclusions. Something moving on the ledge attracted my attention. It was a scurrying black ant. If I had thought about it, I might have wondered how it came there, but the next moment a more curious object on the sill caught my eye. So I bent over. I couldn't make out what it was at first. A bug, perhaps? Maybe it was too small for a bug, just a little dancing dust, no doubt. And then I discerned and gasped. On the sill, there, it was a man. A man on the streetcar's windowsill, a little man. He was so tiny I never would have seen him hadn't it been for his white attire, which made him visible against the brown grain of the shellacked wood. I watched, amazed, as his microscopic figure moved over, perhaps half an inch. He wore a blouse and shorts, it seemed, and sandals. Something might have been hanging at his side, but it was too small for me to make out plainly. His head, I thought, was silver-colored, and I think the headgear had some sort of knobs on it. All this, of course, I didn't catch at the time. My heart was hammering away, excitedly, making my fingers shake as I fumbled for a matchbox in my pocket, pushed it open, and let the matches scatter out. Then, as gently as my excitement would allow, I pushed the tiny man from the ledge into the box, for I suddenly realized the greatness of this amazing discovery. The car was barely half filled, and no attention had been directed my way. I slid quickly out of the empty seat and hurriedly alighted at the next stop. In a daze, I stood where I had alighted, waiting for the next number 10 that would return me home, the matchbox held tightly in my hand. I'd put that box in a museum one day. I collect stamps. I'd heard about getting rare ones with inverted centers, or some minor deviation that made them immensely valuable. I'd imagined getting one by mistake sometime that would make me rich. But this, they'd billed King Kong as the eighth wonder of the world, but that was only imaginary. A film. Terrifying thought crossed my mind. I pushed open the box hastily. Maybe I had been dreaming, but there it was, the unbelievable little man. Car was before me, just leaving. Its polished surface had not reflected through the haze, and the new design made so little noise that I hadn't seen it. I jumped for it, my mind in such turmoil that the conductor had to ask 3 times for my fare. Ordinarily, I would have been embarrassed, but a young man with his mind on millions doesn't worry about little things like that. At least, not this young man. How I acted on the streetcar or traversed the 5 blocks from the end of the line, well, I couldn't tell you. If I'd say myself, though, I must have strode along the street like a determined machine. I reached the house and let myself into the basement room. Inside, I pulled the shades together and closed the door, the matchbox still in my hand. No one was at home this time of day, which pleased me particularly, for I wanted to figure out how I was going to present this wonder to the world. I flung myself down on the bed and opened the matchbox. The little man lay very still on the bottom. "Little man," I cried, and turned him out on the quilt. Maybe he'd suffocated in the box. An irrational thought. Small though it might be to me, the little box was as big as all outdoors to him. It was the bumping about he had endured. I hadn't been very thoughtful of him. He was reviving now and raised himself on one arm. I pushed myself off the bed and stepped quickly to my table to procure something with which I could control him. Not that he could get away, but he was so tiny I thought I might lose sight of him. Pen, pencil, paper, stamps, scissors, clips, none of them were what I wanted. I had nothing definite in mind, but then remembered my stamp outfit and rushed to secure it. Evidently college work had cramped my style along the collecting line, for the tweezers and magnifier appeared with a mild coating of dust. But they were what I needed, so I blew on them and returned to the bed. The little man had made his way half an inch or so from his former prison, was crawling over what I suppose were, to him, great uneven blocks of red and green and black moss. He crossed from a red into a black patch as I watched his movements through the glass. I could see him more plainly against the darker background. He stopped and picked at the substance of his strange surroundings, then straightened to examine a tuft of the cloth. The magnifier enlarged him to a seeming half-inch or so. I could see better now, this strange, tiny creature. It was a metal cap he wore. It did have protruding knobs, 2 of them, slanting at 45-degree angles from his temples like horns. I wondered at their use, but it was impossible for me to imagine. Perhaps they covered some actual growths. He might have had real horns for all I knew. Nothing would have been too strange to expect. His clothing showed up as a simple, white, one-piece garment, like a shirt and gym shorts. The shorts ended at the knee, and from there down he was bare except for a covering on his feet, which appeared more like gloves than shoes. Whatever he wore to protect his feet, it allowed free movement of his toes. It struck me that this man's native habitat must have been very warm. His attire suggested this. For a moment I considered plugging in my small heater. My room certainly had no tropical or subtropical temperature at that time of the morning. How was I to know whether he shivered when he felt chill? Maybe he blew on his horns. Anyway, I figured a living eighth wonder would be more valuable than a dead one. I didn't think he could be stuffed. But somehow I forgot it in my interest in examining this unusual personage. The little man had dropped the cloth now and was staring in my direction. Of course, my direction was very general to him, but he seemed to be conscious of me. He certainly impressed me as being awfully different, but what his reactions were unclear to me. But someone else knew. In a world deep down in smallness, in an electron of a dead cell of a piece of wood, 5 scientists were grouped before a complicated instrument with a horn like the early radios. 2 sat and 3 stood, but their attention upon the apparatus was unanimous. From small hollowed cups worn on their fingers like rings came a smoke from burning incense. These cups they held to their noses frequently, and their eyes shone as they inhaled. The scientists of the infrasmallness were smoking. With the exception of a recent prolonged silence, which was causing them great anxiety, sounds had been issuing from the instruments for days. There had been breaks before, but this silence had been long enduring. Now the voice was speaking again, a voice that was a telepathic communication, made audible. The scientist brightened. "There is much I cannot understand," it said. The words were hesitant, filled with awe. "I seem to have been in many worlds. At the completion of my experiment, I stood on a land which was brown and black and very rough of surface. With startling suddenness, I was propelled across this harsh country, and terrifyingly I was falling. Must have dropped 75 feet, but the strange, buoyant atmosphere of the strange world saved me from harm. My new surroundings were gray and gloomy, and the earth trembled as a giant cloud passed over the sky. I did not know what it meant, but with the suddenness characteristic of this place, it became very dark, and an inexplicable violence shook me into insensibility. I'm conscious now of some great form before me, but it's so colossal that my eyes cannot focus it, and it changes. Now I seem confronted by great orange mountains with curving ledges cut into their sides. Atop them are great grayish slabs of protecting opaque rock, a covering like that above our temples of Erit, on which the rain may never fall. I wish that you might communicate with me, good men of my world. How go the gods? But now these mountains are lifting, vanishing from my sight. A great thing which I cannot comprehend hovers before me. It has many colors, but mostly there's the orange of the mountains. It hangs in the air, and from the portion nearest me grow dark trees as round as myself and as tall. There is a great redness above that opens like the cottus flower, exposing the ivory white from which puffs the tongue of death. Beyond this I cannot see well, but ever so high are two gigantic caverns from which the winds of the legends blow and suck themselves as well. Is dangerous to the Katu by doll. Alternately they crush me to the ground and threaten to tear me from it and hurl me away. My nose was the cavern from which issued that horrifying wind. I noticed my breath distressed the little man, so I leaned over to stare at him. I noticed that my breath distressed the little man as I leaned over to stare at him, and so drew back. Upstairs the visor buzzed. Before answering, so that I would not lose the little man, I very gingerly pinched his shirt with the tongs and lifted him to the table. My breath! I'm shot in the heavens like Milo in his rocket. I traverse a frightful distance. Everything changes constantly. A million miles below is chaos. This world is mad. A giant landscape passes beneath me, so weird I cannot describe it. I cannot understand. Only my heart trembles within me. Neither science nor the gods can help or comfort in this awful world of greatness. We stop. I hang motionless in the air. The ground beneath me is utterly insane, but I see vast uncovered veins of rare metal and crystal, precious crystal, enough to cover the mightiest temple we could build. Oh, that Moria were so blessed! In all this terrifying world, the richness of the crystal and the marvelous metal to redeem. Men, I believe it's a temple, incredibly tall, of black foundation and red spire, but it's weathered, leaning as if to fall, very bare. The people cannot love their gods as we, or else there's the hunger, but the gods may enlighten this world too, and if lowered, I'll make for it. A sacred temple should be a haven. Friends, I descend. The little man's eye had caught my scissors and a glass ruler as I suspended him above my desk. They were his exposed vein of metal and the precious crystal. I was searching for something to secure him. In the last second before I lowered him, his heart swelled at the sight of the temple, my red and black pen slanting upward from the desk holder. A stamp lying on my desk was an inspiration. I licked it, turned it gum side up, and cautiously pressed the little man against it, feet first. With the thought that ought to hold him, I dashed upstairs to answer the call. But it didn't hold him. There was quite a lot of strength in that tiny body. Miserable, miserable fate! I flounder in a horrid marsh. The upset thought waves came to the men of Mortia. This viscous mire seeks to entrap me, but I think I can escape it. Then I will make for the temple. The gods may protect and recognize me there. I missed the call. I delayed too long, but the momentary diversion It cleared my mind and allowed new thoughts to enter. I now knew what my first step would be in presenting the little man to the world. I'd write a newspaper account myself, exclusive, and give the scoop to Earl. Would that be the sensation for his paper? Then I'd be made. Friend of the family, this prominent publisher had often promised he'd give me a break when I was ready. Well, I was ready. Excited, dashing downstairs, I half formulated the idea. The headlines: a little man under the microscope, a world afire to see him, fame, pictures, speeches, movies, money. But here I was at my desk. I grabbed for a piece of typing paper. They'd put that in a museum, too. The stamp of the little man lay just at the edge of the sheet, and he clutched at a great orange mountain covered by a vast slab of curving opaque glass like the temples of Ararat. It was my thumb, but I didn't see him there. I thrust the paper into the typewriter and twirled it through. I've fallen from the mountain, hang perpendicularly, perilously on a limitless white plain. I tremble on the verge of falling, but the slime from the marsh holds me fast. I struck the first key. A metal meteor's roaring down upon me. Is it something I've never before witnessed? Has a tail that streams off beyond sight, comes at terrific speed. I know. The gods are angry with me for leaving Morsha land. Yes, 'tis only they who kill by iron. Their hands clutch the rod in mighty tower Baviat, and thrust it here to stamp me out. And a shaking little figure cried, Baviat Tertia, Morsha Mea, as the gods struck wrathfully at a small one daring to explore their domain. For little man Jekko had contrived to see infinity, and infinity was only for the eyes of the immortals, and those of the experience who dwelt there by the gods' grace. He had intruded into the realm of the rulers, the world of the afterlife, and the gods omnipotent, a mortal in the land of all. In a world deep down in smallness, in an electron of a cell of dead wood, 5 scientists were grouped before the complicated instruments so reminiscent of early radios. But now they were all standing, strained, perspiring, frightened. They trembled, aghast at the dimensions the experiment had assumed. They were paralyzed with terror and awe as they heard the wrath of the affronted gods. And the spirit of science froze within them, and it would die in Morshaland. Seek the skies by only hallowed death was what they knew. They destroyed the machine of the man who had found Venquilland and thought to live, and fled as Jekko's last thoughts came through. For many years, 5 frightened little men of an electron world would live in deadly fear for their lives and for their souls after death, and would pray and become great disciples, spreading the gospels of their gods. True, Jekko had described the monstrous world, but how could a mere mortal experience its true meaning? It was really ethereal and beautiful, was Venquil Land. They'd spend the rest of their lives insuring themselves for the day of experience, when they would assume their comforted place in the world of the afterlife. As I struck the first letter, a strange sensation swept over me. Something compelled me to stop and look at the typing paper. I was using a black ribbon, but when the key fell away, there was a tiny spot of red. Alright, that was The Micro Man. Little micro story there. Just barely anything to just barely anything in that one. I've read stories that expand on this idea of, oh, there were people down in the atom and they have grown themselves into human scale and now they're here. Uh, Farther than that, but anyway, I think we're gonna call it there. Like I said, my back is really just not happy with me tonight, and I'm out of water. We'll be back Friday after next. We will be reading a book that I've been planning on reading that I think you all will recognize. The author of Tarzan has written it, and I hope you come back for that. Anyway, this has been Paper Cuts, and I hope